Hi there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Hey, today I've been really cleaning out my scraps, working on Karen Brown's Declutter Challenge 2024, and today my project for this weekend, actually I'm pretty caught up. I wanted to clear out my scraps, and I've got two really great quilts to share with you today. So this is one of them, and the other one is this one. Originally I was just going to make one big quilt, but I didn't like the way it was looking, as you'll see in the video. So I ended up making two quilts, and I did find a great use for this fabulous bluebird fabric that's in my stash. You can probably do a screenshot, capture that image, and do a Google search. I really have no idea what this fabric is. I just love it. Anyway, come along with me today and I'll show you what I did. And here's my kitty. Okay, let's get started taking a look at my scraps. I've got this one big bag, and this is some leftovers from some other projects. Looking at this bag and my other container of scraps, I saw right away that most of what I had in scraps were strips. Now, they weren't any particular width. They were just all kinds of scraps, just cut off at random, nothing neat, nothing tidy, just long, narrow strips. Now, I've done some very pretty strip quilts that are nice and neat with exactly the right widths of strips, and you can use a strip tube ruler or a strip tube method to make these beautiful squares. What I want to do today is show you another way to do these beautiful strip quilts. If you don't have matchy fabrics or widths of fabric, you can still make a beautiful, beautiful quilt. Now you'll see I'm sorting them into lengths. I have some that are width of fabric, not a lot. Then I have some that are about 30 inches, 24 inches, and all the way down to about 6 inches. Anything smaller than that went back in my scrap bin. Now I'm going to stack these up with the shortest strips on the bottom of the stack. That's because if I have a long strip that doesn't match the strip next to it and I end up cutting something off, I can always throw that piece into one of the smaller length stacks. And now it is time to start chain piecing, and I am going to chain all the way through these stacks, starting with the longest all the way down to the shortest for round one. But first, before you start a chain piecing project like this, fill up all your bobbins. To get this chain piecing started, I just took my first two strips, put them right sides together, and then stitched a 1/4 inch seam. And you'll see when I get to the end, there is quite a large piece that I cut off because they weren't exactly the same length. And I set that aside and put it into one of the smaller, shorter length stacks later. Now I'm going to zip right through round one, but I will tell you that round one, sewing all these strips together the first time, took me 3 hours and 15 minutes. I will leave a link in the description to my Blade Saver product. That product is so useful when I separate chains. With that first set of chains separated, it's on to round 2. And just keep in mind, every round will be half as long as the round before. Well, as you can see, I'm using a different sewing machine to keep working on this project. My Big Singer modern quilter machine had an issue, and I'm going to be taking it into the shop to get that checked out. In the meantime, I have this 1951 Singer Featherweight. It only does a single stitch, and that is just fine for what I'm doing today. Here in round 3, we're sewing 4 strips to 4 more strips. So I told you before that first round took me about 3 hours and 15 minutes just for one round. All the subsequent rounds that you see here till I was ready to press these units was about 3 hours total. So just joining these strips took about 6 hours, 15 minutes. Next, I pressed all these strips as flat as I possibly could because I knew I was going to be cutting them out into specific shapes and sizes. Now, I didn't measure the total length of these strip units. I'm kind of sorry that I didn't, but I did lay them out on my living room floor, and you'll kind of get an idea once you see them laid out that there is a lot of fabric here. Well, I took a sheet of paper and I drew out what I thought might be a good plan for the strip blocks I wanted to make. Of course, as you'll see, I didn't exactly stick with that plan. I am going to be cutting out 10-inch squares. What I'm doing here is I'm starting with the very, very biggest, widest strip first. I want to get as many 10-inch squares as I can get out of this. And to make the strip quilt look, I am lying my ruler on this at a diagonal. So I have a diagonal line on my ruler. I'm kind of just lining that up with any strip, the one in the middle, just eyeballing it. Nothing has to be perfect here. I'm making the top 2 cuts to 10 inches and 10 inches on the other side. Then what I will be doing is flipping my ruler around. I'm going to line up those 2 cut edges with the 10-inch lines on my ruler, and I will then cut the bottom 2 angles to get my finished 10-inch square. Next, I just slid the fabric over to the left a little bit, and I laid down my ruler to try and find the next most beneficial spot to cut a 10-inch square and save and salvage as much fabric as possible. And I'm definitely saving all those odd triangle pieces, and you will see what I do with those later. Now, when I got to the width of fabric that I could no longer cut diagonal 10-inch squares, I simply cut squares that were straight. And these squares also measure 10 inches. My little drawing plan had a piano key border, so I cut some 5-inch widths out of some of these strips that were not wide enough for 10-inch squares. With some of the other remnants, I just cut a straight edge so I could join it to something else later. The triangles that I had salvaged off of the original cuts, I cut those into 3 different sizes. One that was lined up with my 7-inch marks on the ruler, one lined up with 8-inch marks, and one lined up with 9-inch marks. So here's what I have to work with. I've got those triangles, I've got 5-inch width strips for my piano key border. I've got some random pieces that do have a straight edge. Plus, I've got a lot of 10-inch squares to work with. My first task is to complete the star of the show, and that is these diagonal blocks. So I'm going to be stitching 2 together, and I'm going to make sure they're making like a diamond pattern. So I'm going to just chain piece 2 together, then 2 more together, and then I'll be putting 2 with another 2 to make a 4 patch that's a diamond shape. Of course, I forgot that this little Singer featherweight does not have a mark for a 1/4-inch seam, so I took off a little piece of my diagonal seam tape and put that on my machine for now. When it came time to sew 2 blocks together with 2 other blocks, I used extensive clips just to hold those seams where they needed to go as they approached the needle. It made it go a lot faster, actually. I am clipping that center seam first where the 2 blocks come together. That is my center of my block. I do want to make sure that's lined up, but as for the rest of the seams, it doesn't matter. They're going to be different. There's not going to be any other seams that actually line up. Well, here is the finished result of stitching all 16 of those diagonal blocks together. I really like it, and now I'm going to try and stitch some more of these 10-inch squares together, the ones that are just straight lines, and see how that looks. All right, well, here is a look at these 2 sections laid out together. I'm still wondering if they're going to be one quilt at this point. Next, I wanted to go into these triangle sections and make some blocks. So there are a couple ways I could have done it. I could have just sewed 2 triangles together to make a square, but I wanted bigger squares. So I'm going to be putting 4 triangles together into one square, starting with a straight edge on 2 triangles, and then I will be putting two of these units together to make a final square. Again, similar to the other blocks, I am starting with the center seam, clipping that to make sure my center of my square is correct and the seams match. The rest of the seams are not going to match, but I'm just going ahead and clipping a little bit to help me get it through the sewing machine a little better. After I press these new squares flat, I trimmed them to 3 different sizes. I wanted to make a large section that was the same size as my other sections, so based on the width of my other sections, I added in some pieces of that leftover fabric between these triangle blocks to make it the same width as the other sections. I laid everything I had completed down to just see if I liked the way it looked. After seeing this on the floor, I decided to go in a different direction, which I liked a lot better. Luckily, I had plenty of pieces left that I could cut more 5-inch piano key border from. Once I had enough to go all the way around this section, I stitched all those piano key 5-inch pieces together into one long strip to make that outer border. I decided I wanted an inner border of white, and I just used jelly roll strips, 2.5-inch strips, all the way around the outside for the inner border. Once that inner border was pressed flat and trimmed, I added the outer border of the piano key border, the 5-inch strip. Once all those borders were on and pressed flat and trimmed, we have a beautiful, beautiful quilt top. These strip quilts are some of my favorite. I just love the way they look. Now we do have a second quilt to talk about. I ended up using those sections that I had done with the triangles and with the straight blocks, and I put that inner border and then that outer border around, And I love the way this one looks too. If you're enjoying my channel, I invite you to subscribe and hit that bell icon to get notified when I post new videos. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had fun, and I hope to see you back again real soon.